press record.
Welcome back to How to Get the Most Out of Your AJC Career Coaching School Experience podcast and interviews. My gorgeous guest today is Caroline. Hi, Caroline.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great, Dave. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Caroline and I have been chatting a little bit before we hit record, so we're gonna jump straight into this because there's some interesting things come out already, actually, which is really, really cool. But you're going to start by reading your bio today, is that right?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just give a snapshot, Dave, because you know, bios by definition, you know, tend to be very long and unwieldy.
Yeah, no, that's good. Go for it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, brilliant. So my name is Caroline Hughes. I'm a CEO of an organization called Conscious Leadership Development. And that means simply that I'm an executive coach. I work typically with leaders in business and also with their teams and working through how do we get the most out of working together, particularly for people who have long history and maybe a bit of baggage, and trust and communication might not always be as good as it could be. So that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment from a work point of view. In terms of, I suppose, who I am really, you know, I'm from rural Ireland. I grew up in a family of 5, second youngest, born to 2 teachers. So education and community were really big part of the philosophy of life in the Hughes family. And, you know, I grew up very much with that sense of it takes a village. And my mum in particular, you know, was very conscientious about being a person in the community. And also, you know, even in school where we would have had tasks kind of for the betterment, not just of ourselves and of our class, but of the broader kind of community as well. So that's really kind of shaped kind of my philosophy of life, Dave, you know, in terms of, you know, how can you pull together to get the best out of each other? Because, you know, teams together, everyone achieves more, very much kind of comes in for me from very, very early life. And so to find myself, I suppose, working in an area where it's all about the evolution of others. And of course, through that, sometimes you have to take your own medicine too, don't you? You know, and do your own work, right? Which is kind of part of what led me to
I have heard that.
Yeah, so, you know, if I'm not, I suppose, being a stand for other people in terms of supporting their own development, you can be absolutely sure I am putting myself through the rigor of my own work too, you know. And how many times have I heard, well, you know, I wish there was a simple answer, but I think the answer is do the work, you know. So that's a flavor of, I suppose, who I am and what I do. And when I'm not working, I'm an avid hiker. I'm very, very fortunate that I have hiked some of the most beautiful mountains and difficult mountains all over the world, and Kilimanjaro and Base Camp Everest and
really?
Mont Blanc. And yeah, my friends used to joke, Dave, that the higher up in my career I went, because I was a global director of development in a big multinational, and my friends used to say, you know, the bigger the job you have, the longer the walk you need. And they were so true, you know, they were so accurate in that, you know, that balance between having to go all in, I suppose, professionally is really kind of, it follows through, it goes throughout my life that whatever I commit to, I go all in. And for a time it was climbing these big mountains and taking on these big expeditions so that, you know, you can have a different experience of life, you know, and you really learn how to follow when you're on a mountain.
Yeah,
somebody else is in charge, you know.
I love that. You really learn how to follow when you're on a mountain. That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, that's incredible.
You have to give it up, you know. You have to, there's a guide in front saying, drink this amount of water, take this pace, you know, look at the beauty that's around you. You're not on your phone because, well, you're busy trying to breathe, you know, which becomes a more difficult task.
Yeah, well, there's significantly less oxygen. It's less tempting to take selfies. Yeah,
exactly. And, you know, and I just, and even in that, you know, particularly when you hike somewhere that's remote and you see some of the indigenous cultures kind of in their own land, and very conscious, I'm a visitor here.
Yeah.
And, you know, what can I learn? Like, what can I see? You know, what's amazing here? How they stockpile wood kind of as insulation against the elements, and then obviously it diminishes across the winter as it gets burned for fuel, you know. Really simple things, how how children walk for miles across boulders to get to a school or to, have a medical appointment if there's even somewhere nearby. And by nearby, it might be a day or two's walk, and you really see people dig deep on an everyday level to get what they need. And I think we learn a lot from stepping away from the busyness of life, slowing ourselves down, stepping into somewhere that's so deeply uncomfortable that actually the only way to survive is to settle in and go, I'm here to learn. What's in this? What can I support people with? How do I support myself? And my favorite phrase, how do I suck the marrow out of this experience?
Something just occurred to me then, which I think is really, well, it's interesting for me anyway. You said something about discomfort then.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that maybe discomfort is our home, really. Maybe that's really where we belong. And the hunting for comfort is a sort of like mind-made distraction. But I tell you why it came to me, Easter and all of that. And there was a passage in one of the services that I sang at, something about resting in the wounds of Christ. And I'm sure in, different religions, it would be different things, whatever, but I'm just sharing, what I was participating in. And it just hit me then, there's something about that. It hasn't quite sunk in the noodle yet, but at some point, there is something about, making discomfort your home. Interesting.
Yeah, I like what you're pointing to, Dave, because what comes up for me is, there's this phrase we use a lot about, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. But actually, my interpretation of that is there is at some point, there's a tipping point between risk and reward. And sometimes the taking of the risk is actually the allowing yourself out of your comfort zone. And in doing that, you kind of break up, you break a barrier, you break through to the other side. And this phrase, and this comes up in the school a lot, right? This phrase of the ceiling becomes a new floor. Because actually, very often what we're breaking through are limits that we have put upon ourselves through our thinking, through past experience, that there's a fear of recurring, or there's a beautiful phrase that I read in a book by Jain, I'm a badass for making money. And that's a book club we had as kind of an adjunct.
Oh, yes, yeah.
There was a splinter group, right, that Beshley Donaldson ran. And she had a beautiful phrase in it. And she said, the walls of my comfort zone are lovingly decorated with all my favorite excuses.
Yeah, I love that.
Ouch.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny you were saying that, because like before we did this morning, I had a training session at the gym, and a lot of the stuff I've been doing is around mobility. Because over the years I've spent a long time sitting in the car, sitting at a desk, and now we're sitting chatting and whatever, and you just get stiffer and stiffer. And a few months ago I thought, all right, this has got to change, or the next 56 years are just going to get uncomfortable, really. So I was doing this stretch this morning, and then suddenly something released in one of my hips, and there was this huge. I'd make a lot of noise in the gym, like seriously. These big sounds came out, and this huge sound came out, and you're right. There's then this whole new space or place where you're going to function from, which you could not possibly have known of from the other side of the tension. You just couldn't. It is like a wall or a ceiling, and you don't put them there. No one wakes up in the morning, I don't think, and thinks, do you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to seal my capacity. But we'll have built up over time, over years, habits that make that the way it is. And I think you can just gently deconstruct those ceilings so that you can see more of the space, more of the sky, more of the time. It really struck the physicality of all of this. I've always thought of it more as a sort of mental game, really, because I quite enjoy mental gymnastics. But I'm seeing more and more the visceral nature of what we're talking about. The felt experiential nature. Cool.
And I guess some of what you're describing, Dave, is you can get there on your own, sure. And very often in the coaching relationship, you know, it's the coach that may often have a glimpse of what that greater horizon is, that's not maybe visible to you because of where you sit now, in the thinking that you have in this moment, in the limitations and the past conditioning that's creating a particular reality. And, you know, I guess this is where this phrase, to do your own work, you know, that is one of the stock phrases from the school, you know. That's been my experience, that the more we as coaches, we as individuals, you know, push through our own boundaries, put our head through that false ceiling that's really there, and realize, oh, I've gone up in the elevator and suddenly there's another landscape and it's okay to be here. And sometimes, you know, my experience of the school and my experience of really good coaches is that, like, we're like a magnet for that greatness, to really allow that to expand, to give it space that it's safe to even explore. Because, you know, our minds can be so powerful around what is real and what is true and what is possible. And, you know, the school, I guess, creates this container for, it was 21 students last year, I know it's much bigger this year, to allow us to support each other, to grow and to break through our own ceilings. And as a result, we can see things differently for other people, because we've, you know, we have reconciled some of our own work. We've peeled back some layers of our own proverbial onion of our being.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. There was something you said like really early on. It was about your, you know, your upbringing. And yeah, I think you were talking about your, it was teachers, wasn't it? Your
both my parents, yes.
Yeah, both parents were teachers. And I had like a sudden, that's why I love doing these things, a sudden flashback to my parents' sort of opposing dynamic of development. So my mum was really always developing herself, and I'd never thought about this until today. It never occurred to me at all that she was actually always developing herself and had several career changes and whatever. And my dad, who was, I would have said, the more sort of like naturally gifted at what he did. He was a brilliant designer, brilliant engineer, and could just see solutions for things so quickly that I don't think he ever really saw the necessity for development. So so I remember once he went to night school to do a management course, I think, so that it was basically so he could get a promotion, they could pay him more, you know.
Yeah.
And he had to write an essay. And I can remember when he brought it home, I mean, he failed, because that's all it was in those days, I think, pass, fail. He'd written 5 lines. I remember my mum saying to him, well, you know, she would say, Philip, that was his name, in this very sort of quite judgmental way. Philip, what's that? And he said, well, I said what was needed to be said. And in 5 lines, not quite what the people had in mind from a management point of view. But what's interesting for me is seeing how that dynamic, that tension, plays out in my own world, like this huge commitment on the one hand, and then there can be the sort of reluctance to try and maintain, you know, not letting the ceiling fall in almost.
Yes. At
the same, you know, that kind of, and it's how you walk that tension, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily going to dissolve, or it might dissolve and then it'll reform again. That seems to be quite a natural thing as far as I can see. So I love that. That's such a, yeah, thanks for letting me see that. That was really cool. I'd never thought about that about my mum at all. That's amazing.
Yeah. Welcome to the school, Dave.
Amazing. Yeah, no, exactly. And do you know what's really interesting, actually? A couple of things. This is so fascinating. Like, originally when I set out to do this, it was really very much for me. It was like, okay, it is a big commitment doing this kind of thing. And I don't think many times perhaps in life I've played like full out, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go this time. Let's see what that's like. But actually I kind of drifted away from that original sort of thought, and yeah, it's interesting, in talking to you this morning, I feel like I'm coming back closer to what I originally set out to do. when I was doing these interviews with you guys. So yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
Mm,
I'm going to ask one of my questions because
you please. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and because it occurred to me to do it actually, and it's this one. Probably won't ask another one, but what's changed that you never would have expected to change for you?
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines of what we've been speaking of, Dave, to be honest, that I guess when I signed up for the school, first of all, I signed up because I liked Ankush, even though I'd never met him. And I had watched how committed he is to his own development. And I could even see in the quality of his posts, I could see something different was happening for him compared with the 6 months earlier where I had first interacted with him. And, there was a part of me that wanted a piece of that, quite honestly. And then I saw him talking with or interviewing Melissa Ford. He had done a series of YouTube interviews or live stream interviews in advance of the school last year. And I always happened to catch them live. It was just one of those funny things. I always happened to go on Facebook and catch part of a live stream with one of the faculty from the school. And I heard Melissa talk about service. And I said to myself, oh, I do that. I thought that was just, I thought that was just work. I thought that's just how everybody did stuff. But she talked about service in a different way. And she talked about the partnership of service. And that, having a full and thriving practice is an act of service, coming from the spirit of, or the feeling of, this has to work for both of us. That's service. And I started to see this distinction between service and pleasing, even in watching that video. And to the point, I said, right, I'm definitely doing this school, that I actually forgot to tell Ankush. And this was May, this is true, this is May of last year, right?
Yeah.
And 27th of July, Ankush put a post out saying 3 places left. And I went, like, what's wrong with me? I haven't never told Ankush I'm doing the school, And so when I had the conversation with Ankush, I said to him, Ankush, I'm not concerned about content because I've seen all of the videos. Melissa's philosophy of service really kind of had me at hello, because this was something that was kind of turning on its head some of what I talked about service, which really was pleasing, and kind of given it a broader dimension. So when I committed to the school, and it's funny because when I was preparing kind of for the podcast, I said, like, I know I wrote something last year when I was doing this, and I found a sheet that I had written, a piece that I had written after I talked to Ankush, because my conversation with Ankush was about what's the commitment I need to make to myself to get the most out of this school. Not what are you going to teach me? How do I need to show up? Who do I need to be in order to really, back to my favorite phrase, suck the marrow out of this?
Yeah.
Because, it's not a small investment. By the end, you'd pay double. But when you have to write the check, it's going, okay, this is a certain amount, euro exchange, plus travel, plus flights, plus London accommodation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a fee, is it?
Right. Yeah. Plus time out of the business, investing in myself too. And so I was saying to myself, okay, that's probably going to be about 10, 11,000 in total euro. So I need to make twice that, was kind of my commitment to myself. And I literally wrote down here, why am I going to this school? I like Ankush. There's a genuineness about how he goes about his work, which has caused me to follow him since being introduced by Georgia Bazin, who was a friend from a Michael Neal course. He has earned his stripes in his own business and having some earnings to cover the costs. In investing in this way, I am committed to, and this is exactly what I wrote, earning back double or higher of the total investment, school, flights, accommodation, which I estimate to be about 20,000 within 1 year. Playing full out, showing up with vulnerability throughout, networking my ass off, getting to know fellow students, their business, them as people, learning from them. I commit to being bold, playing bravest, and giving myself the best chance to suck the marrow out of this opportunity. I am booking my flights immediately.
Wow.
That's literally I scribbled some things.
That's
But what
so
that is,
cool.
what?
That's so cool, isn't it? I love that you found that for this.
I
That's amazing.
love that I did. And I was literally
Yeah.
kind of cleaning up my desktop and getting myself ready, and I found it and I went, wow, I must have to send this to Ankush. But anyway, here you are getting the exclusive, Dave.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what that did for me, right, was that really inspired me to be the student, to let go of the things that I thought I knew
yeah,
and not kind of make up my own version of it.
yeah,
And kind of was, if Ankush said, have conversations, I was going to have conversations. If Ankush, if Ankush said, show up in service, I was showing up in service. And I was willing to get it wrong. I was willing to do it whatever way felt right for me based on the thinking I had, the information that I had absorbed, and my frame of reference at the time.
yeah.
And that served me so well. And even I'm so amazed I even wrote at the time, showing up with vulnerability throughout, because you asked me what's been unexpected. Like the bit for me that's been so completely unexpected is we did some work around acknowledgement, which was my toughest lesson. And again, going back to that interview with Melissa Ford, she had said the thing that's hardest for you to learn is probably the thing that has the most impact. And that was her experience of learning being service. And this, I kind of call it this velvet bullet of acknowledgement, where I would say throughout my life, I've had a healthy self-esteem, and I've always been more concerned with, did the thing get done rather than the who did it?
Yeah.
And I had this very low need for having to be the person who, stood on the top with the arms up going, yay, that was me. Very, very low need for that, but very high in terms of giving other people credit for work and worth. And suddenly I found myself this particular day in the second module, having really pushed my limits the previous day around, there was a money-making exercise that we had to do, and I did things I never thought I would do. And I had a lot of thinking about what I had just done and what did it say about me and what did it mean. And, the proverbial thought storm was brewing kind of well. And then we started to talk about acknowledgement, and Ankush gave us this task to do, which was to take a selfie with somebody in the school and write on Facebook, how you see them, and what if they've done something for you, acknowledge that publicly. And because so much was happening in my head that morning, that I felt I didn't belong there. I felt, I'm really was going through the horrors, to be honest. And then some of my colleagues from the school were coming over and taking selfies. Oh, you helped me with this, and I want to acknowledge that. And as this started, the storm got louder. The wind was,
It would, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Whoa,
Yeah.
It was really like, is it the wolf at the door at Red Riding Hood? And he's huffing and puffing to blow the house down and not realizing that's not going to get him in the door. It was kind of like that for me. And by the time the Sunday morning came, I really was in pieces. And one of those moments, where I felt my arm dislocated from my body with my hand up, and Ankush was going, Karen, what do you want to say? And I'm going, oh, I really don't want to contribute at this moment. I'm so completely overwhelmed by the level of visibility that my colleagues and friends in the school could see of my greatness, of what it was. They were putting language on what I was bringing to the party in a way which I didn't dare, because at that moment, it was simply too painful, because I was in a place of not belonging. That's who I was being in that moment, and to start experiencing this maelstrom of the total opposite.
Yeah, because you've got that paradox, haven't you, with who you felt you were being for you, and actually their feedback of who they were seeing you as.
Yeah.
And they were like, it sounded to me like they were like butting up each other. And it was
absolutely, like the tectonic plates colliding,
Yeah, that's so incredible.
And that just dissolved something for me. That in the really stepping in, and in the allowing of that, and in the daring to allow, because sometimes, sometimes there's cultural overlays that it's not okay to, step fully into who you are, and sometimes that's just self-imposed, like we chatted about at the beginning. But this, what I call this velvet bullet of acknowledgement, what it has done for me is it's like we chatted just before we went into record, where I was a person who had these carefully constructed versions. The public version, the corporate Caroline, the private version who friends and family got to see. And then there's the version that only I, know, or only I dare to look at sometimes and hope doesn't seep out through. And what I realized was a lot of what I was hiding is that which is great and good.
Yeah.
And that's why I call it this kind of bullet of acknowledgement. And it's like it ricochets between these three versions, and it just puts holes between it to allow kind of for a level of self-expression that I never would have thought possible.
You should offer that, you should offer that as a service, the Velvet Bullet session.
Oh, I might we might have a little offer here today, actually, Dave. Yeah,
because what you've just described there,
yeah,
I massively relate to it, and I think so many people who listen to this will relate to that and think, wow, yeah, I'd love to have a velvet bullet session. I love it. I just love the title. I love how in these discussions, there was something you said earlier about, we can do it alone. And I remember the thought came in at the time. I'm like, you know what? As time goes by, I'm less and less convinced by that. I'm really convinced that for all of us, this is the way forward. These kind of conversations, this kind of depth of exploration. And I think, a lot of my work, some of it's been in businesses, but quite a lot of it's been in education. And a lot of schools think they have coaching cultures. No, they don't. They really don't. That's not fair to say. They do in a sense, but really this, imagine if acknowledgement was a normal part of the day, particularly in schools for younger kids, etc. There's so much we could talk about. Caroline, you've been amazing. I'm conscious of the time. We've just created something you can offer, a velvet bullet. You also had a coaching agreement session that you'd like to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, even though we didn't talk about it here, when I did the webinar for people who were interested in the school, one of the things that there was a lot of feedback on was creating a powerful coaching agreement. And so, for your newsletter members, Dave, or people who listen to this, podcast at any time, I would be absolutely willing to have a 60 to 90 minute session with anyone to go through a real coaching agreement that goes beyond the how do you pay me and please show up in time. It really kind of goes into actually what's the agreement between us, the two of us in partnership with each other in pursuit of whatever the goal is of the client. And so that's something that I would like to offer. But let's also put the velvet bullet on the table, Dave. As an opportunity to have a conversation about what acknowledgement is and the power of it at an individual level, like we've just discussed. So yes, anyone who wants to get in touch with me, I'm on Facebook, Caroline Hughes, also on LinkedIn. My website is www.consciousleaders.ie. You can sign up for my new newsletter. That first edition went out yesterday, which I'm very proud of. So yeah, plenty of ways to be in touch, Dave. And thank you so much for having me this morning. And I really want to acknowledge the lovely conversation, lovely space that you have co-created here with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Caroline Hughes, you are a legend. And you do some really cool stuff in the world too.
Thank you.